Hello, welcome to the live stream. So, I've done a few of these already, and the last time I was doing some Winter 22 demo builds for my user group. And before that, it was about migrating workflow rules over to Flow. Folks may have seen the Dreamforce announcement that workflow rules and process builders will be eventually being removed from Salesforce in favor of Flow. Nothing to immediately worry about, but we want to start planning our migration plan. And we also want to make sure that as admins and developers, we're familiar enough with the tool. So any new automation that we may decide to build, we consider building it in Flow first. And so saves us less things to migrate later in the future. So if you missed the workflow rule one, you can find in the list. I wish I could be YouTube savvy enough to have something magically pop up someplace, but I'm not. This is also a live stream. So if you're watching live, feel free to put something in the chat, questions and so forth. I'm happy to do that. If you're not watching this live and you're watching this after the recording has gone out, feel free to leave a comment. I do monitor all the chat and all the comments all the time. And if you do have a question, I will do my best to answer it. Also, if you have any other requests of what you would like to see, let me know that too, because I would like to do more of these, and it would help to know what people actually want to see. So we're going to dive right into this, and we're going to start by looking at Process Builder. So the process that we have for today is based off of opportunities. And if we look in, we have a pretty straightforward process. We have things that are happening based on some stages, whether or not a discount was applied. And then we have the closed one where some things are happening immediately and some things are happening on a scheduled basis. Now, when we're looking through this, the first thing we have to think about is how do we want to archetype the flow? For example, if we look through the nodes here, we could create a flow where each one of these diamonds, these decision nodes, becomes a decision element in flow. So we have a flow that gets triggered off, and then we go through and say, is the stage qualification? Is the stage needs analysis? Is the stage closed won? And if it is, do different actions. That's definitely an option. Another option we can do is we can create a flow for every one of these nodes. So we can have one that says, here's the actions for qualification. Here's the flow for needs analysis. Here's the flow for closed won. That is also a perfectly valid way to architect. However, what the best way is really going to come down to what are you trying to do and what's your concern for maintenance. From my perspective, the challenge of having one flow to rule them all on a process like this is the fact that that flow has to get triggered every single time the record is going to be created or updated in order to evaluate your decision elements. And anytime you have to have that automation do that evaluation at the decision element level, you're adding processing time, you're adding CPU time, which could have an impact on how fast things occur. There may be times where you want to do it all in one. If you're really concerned about saying, I need to have A happen, then B, then C, that is one way that with the current release features we have, we can control the order of execution of our automation. The other reason why you may want to consider doing one flow is just a maintenance standpoint. It may be easier to say, I'm going to have one flow per object if I can, and have all my actions in there. So when something needs to change for opportunities, I just have to go to one place. And if you don't have tons of automation happening on that particular object, that might be an okay thing to do. Just be aware that as your automation gets more and more complicated, you're going to add some fragility into the system. Simply because things have to run all the time. We could do this by having one flow for the object of here's everything that we're going to have fire with decision elements. And then we can create subflows for the actual actions. That's a good option if you need the same actions to happen in multiple circumstances. We can't do that with Process Builder. So if I have the exact same chatter post for qualification as needs analysis with maybe just some small text things, I cannot do that within a particular Process Builder. I have to recreate the chatter post action every single time I want to use it. Whereas if we created a subflow for the chatter post, we could actually do that where we say, look, this is going to have the exact same thing. It's going to be to the record, and maybe we're changing one word or two or something like that. For this particular process, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of think of how can we categorize these actions. And if we look through the list, there's a few things. One of them is chatter posts, like we're looking at. We also have an action that is updating the next step on the opportunity. So we're updating the record that's doing the triggering. We're also sending an email alert for saying, hey, there's been a discount applied. Using a custom field that I have on here for what the discount is. The last thing is we are setting the account type when the opportunity is closed won, and we're sending, we're creating a new opportunity 60 days after the close date on a closed won opportunity for the renewal. So there's lots of different actions on here. And one of the things I like to look at is figure, are the things that are editing the particular record that's triggering, like our update the next step. Because in those, we could write a before flow, and there's advantages to doing that. A before flow runs faster, it takes less CPU time. So anything that is modifying the record that is calling that flow or being triggered, I like to use before flows for that. Anything else, like chatter posts or updating other records or creating other records, those all have to be done as after flows. So the actions that are categorized as after, we can look at it and say, do we want to do this as one flow or multiple flows? The last thing to look at is, what do you have for scheduled actions? Because Process Builder and Flow handle scheduled actions differently. In Process Builder, the way we have this set up is we have one process, we go all the way down, we get to our decision to say, hey, does our record meet this criteria? If it did, then do these actions after 60 days or whatever your time frame may be. It's similar in Flow, except for the criteria for when you should schedule something is done at the start level. So that means for anything that you have as a scheduled action, we can't use a decision element to decide should something be scheduled or not. You have to have the criteria for when something should be scheduled directly in the start node. So anything that is scheduled actions with a specific criteria for when this action should get scheduled has to be its own flow. No way around that. Now, if we had multiple different actions that are fired at different times, but are scheduled on the same criteria, like, hey, when an opportunity is closed won, 7 days later, I want to do a follow-up email alert. 60 days later, I want to create a renewal opportunity. Those we could bundle into a single flow because the criteria for when it should get scheduled is the same. It's just that when the actions get fired is different. Okay, so looking through the list, we have our stages for qualification, we have needs analysis, and we have discount applied. So all three of these have after actions, and then we have our update next step, which can be done as before. So we're going to start with that one first. We're going to build the before flow first, then we'll do the afters, and we'll decide whether or not we want to bundle them or not. I think for this training, we'll give you an example of bundling for the chatter posts and the email discount notice for the email alert. But just so you have an idea what that looks like, honestly, I would probably call these out as separate flows simply because the fact the criteria is so cut and dry. There's not a lot of wiggle room between something that's qualification or needs analysis. It's either A or B. So let's start, though, with the before update, where we want to update the next step to say analyze needs. So we're going to go to our flow tab. And first things first, I want to take a look at all the trigger flows I already have in the system to make sure that I don't have any overlaps. And we can see we have two here. We have close one actions and we have negotiate and review before. And in both of these cases, these were created from our workflow room migration, but they're both deactivated. They're not active. So these are not being used by the system, which means I can either update them or we can create new ones. And that's what we're going to do today is we're going to create new. And we're starting with needs analysis. So we're going to click the new flow button. And the first thing we have to say is what type of flow we're building. We have lots of issues. Selections. For the most part, if you're migrating workflow rules or migrating process builders, you're pretty much always doing record trigger flows because you want to do something based on the record being created or updated. So we're doing a record trigger flow. Now we have our choice between freeform and auto layout. Auto layout looks really nice and clean. It is a beta feature, so there are certain things that it cannot do. It's getting close to it. For most of the things we're going to do from a process builder standpoint, we're going to be able to use the auto layout. That's what I'm going to use today. If you want to see what it looks like to do freeform, you can check out the workflow rules example because I did show briefly what the freeform layout looks like. So right off, we have to configure our start. This is where all our record trigger flows, start. That's the name. We begin by putting in the object, so we're triggering on the opportunity. We need to decide when do we want to track or trigger on that object, and we have a bunch of choices. We can say a record is created, a record is updated, a record is created or updated, or a record is deleted. And for our example today, we're going to do a record created or updated, which means it'll catch the situations where an opportunity is created and they set the stage immediately to needs analysis, or if the record was already created and they moved it to needs analysis. I need to pick easier stage names so I'm not having to stumble over the names. Next is our entry conditions. When should the flow actually get fired? If we do nothing, it's always going to run. But that's not what we want. We need to add some conditions to this, and our conditions are going to be where the stage is needs analysis. Don't need to have anything else. Now we have when we want to run the flows, and there's two options. Basically, it's anytime a record is created or edited and it meets the conditions, or if it's updated to meet the conditions. And in most circumstances, you're going to be selecting the second option. The times that you would take the first one are when you would have criteria where every single time the record meets the criteria, you want to run the actions or evaluate the flow, regardless of was it just changed to meet it or not. So if I had the first radio button selected, it would mean all my actions will get fired anytime a record is edited and the stage is currently needs analysis. And we don't want that. We only want it to have happened that first time it gets moved over to it. The next bit, optimize the flow for fast fields or actions related records. This does a really good job of explaining what's what. Essentially, my rule of thumb is anytime that you are modifying just the record that is involved in the flow, you're going to use the fast field updates. Essentially, it's a before trigger. If you're doing anything else, all those things have to happen afterwards. And then the last item is we can include an asynchronous run, which we can't select with the before trigger, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. We're not going to actually use it today, but we'll take a look at it and talk about it. So here's our flow. We are starting off right now with just the start element, and we need to add our first step. Now, if we go back to our process builder, we can see if with our needs analysis, everything that we did here in our needs analysis is effectively done in the start element. So now we're moving on to the actions, and we have our chatter post and updating the next step. We don't want to do the chatter post in this flow because it's a before trigger flow. We do want to update the next step which is updating the opportunity itself. So let's go back to our flow. And because we're doing a before trigger flow, we can set the values of the opportunity directly without having to do anything else. And we do that using an assignment. And we're going to say set opportunity. And we correct, because I cannot spell when I'm live typing. And we want to put a description. All field changes to the record that triggered the flow. All right, so for our variable, right now we only have 3 options. We can create a new resource, we can grab a variable about the flow itself, or we can get the record. That's what we're going to use. In all cases, when you're dealing with record trigger flow, this $ record is the record that triggered the flow. So when we select that, we now can see all the opportunity fields, and we're updating next step. So we'll select next step. We put in equals, and then we just have to paste in the value. Oh, I did it bad. I didn't copy and paste. Let me copy and paste that properly. There we go. Analyze needs. Done. That's it. We're done with this flow. It's really, really simple. It's basically, when do we want to track it? What are we changing? And we don't need to do an update or anything else like that because it's a before trigger. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And now we need to name it. I like to start by including the object name in the front just because it helps groups everything together. And analysis before actions on stage needs analysis. Okay, and then we save. Flow's done. We can activate it and go on. So we'll go ahead and activate this now. And close down the builder, and let's look at the next items. So we've taken care of this particular item. Now we have our chatter posts and our email alerts. And although I probably wouldn't necessarily architect it this way, we're going ahead and do it for today's example. So that means anytime the flow has the stage qualification, needs analysis, or my discount field is set, we're going to want to evaluate the particular flow again. So we're going to do a new flow. Again, it's a record triggered flow. We'll do our auto layout. And our object is the opportunity. Again, it's created or updated. And we have a couple of choices. At this point, we can say no conditions. And if we do that, then it's going to run every single time, and we're 100% reliant on our decision elements that we build. Alternatively, we can add conditions. So, for example, we can do something that says, hey, I only want to fire this particular flow when the stage is qualification, when the stage needs analysis, and the discount is changed. We could do that, and then we just need to set our conditions. And our example here, it's ORs, where it's got to be either qualification or needs analysis, or the discount is changed. This is actually a more tightly organized way to do it, and it makes sense for our particular use case simply because our criteria is pretty simple. But you can imagine that if we're going to try to architect our flows for opportunities, so all after actions that we can do are pretty much in the actual single flow, this can be problematic. And you may actually be easier just to run it every single time. Now, we don't get a choice here for doing only when the record is updated to meet the requirements, and that is because this change is here. And now if we stop for a second, we think, if this is how we're going to group things, what's the challenge here? Well, if it's every time the record meets the criteria, that's any of the criteria we specified. So that means this flow is going to get triggered if the stage's qualification, needs analysis, or the discount was changed, regardless if the stage was just moved to qualification or just moved to needs analysis. We don't want that to happen. right? We only want our actions to happen when the first time it moves. So we have to take a step back and think, do we want to archetype type it this way? One choice that we can do is, in the simplest, would just be remove the discount and do the discount as a separate flow. A second option that we can do is we can go back to not putting the stage name qualifications in there or the discount, just run it every single time, and then use our decisions to do the comparison to see how things met. And I really don't recommend doing that. It will work. Your decisions will look something like prior record stage is not the same as the current record stage, and this current stage value is qualification. And then we're doing that same type of logic for needs analysis, and then doing the same type of logic for decision. It gets more complicated that way. For our sake, we're going to just do it this way. We're going to take care of the chatter post that it is for qualifications and needs analysis. Lump those together, do the discount as a separate flow. So we'll go ahead and hit done here. You'll notice we could check this to add an asynchronous path because we're doing an after trigger flow. Nothing we're doing here needs to happen asynchronously. So we're going to go ahead and hit done, go here. Now, at this point, we need to differentiate the actions because we have different actions that we're going to do depending upon, is it qualification or is it needs analysis. So we're going to hit the little plus sign here, and this time we're going to do a decision, and we'll name our decision, and we'll do the first outcome as being qualification. I got to select the record first. So record stage equals qualification. And then we're going to go add another one for needs analysis. So we'll do record stage needs analysis. And we could use the outcome for everything else, which is what we're going to do. I usually don't like using the outcome for valid pathways. I like to use the default outcome as kind of almost like an extra error check, saying, hey, I expect to get one of these outcomes, and if I get something else, I want to kind of bypass or skip the rest of the flow. The other thing we'll notice is we do have this execute outcome, where we can say if the conditions requirements are met, or only if the record triggered the flow to run is updated to meet the conditions. Similar to what we have in the start. So we're going to set it here. Now, this means we might have been able to do one flow with the discount. I still don't like that because I think it's so muddy. And as a matter of fact, I really don't like doing what we're doing right now because I also think it's kind of muddy. It kind of makes sense, but there's really not a whole lot of benefit to grouping this particular type of flow. As I stated earlier, the conditions are so specific. You're never going to have a situation where the conditions kind of overlap and you may have the actions for qualification fire and the needs analysis fire. This is more to give you an example of how you could architect things together. So we'll create done, and our overlay creates us 3 different paths. We have one for each of the outcomes, and we'll start with the qualification first. So here we're going to be doing our action, and our action is going to be a chatter post. Okay, and we get our message, so I'm going to cheat. And we're going to go over to our qualification area. We'll grab the message there and we'll post it right here. And while I'm here, we'll just update the little typo that I had in my process. Can't believe that passed qualification. Now we have our target name or ID. This is going to be the ID of the opportunity, which is just ID. Opportunity ID. And we have a bunch of other stuff which we don't need to include. We'll hit done. We'll do the same thing for needs analysis. And we'll go back to our process builder, grab the text from this action, paste it as our message, record, opportunity ID, and then nothing happens for everything else. That's essentially our flow. And if I had other actions I wanted to include in here on an after base, I could. Now, there's other ways we could have architected this. We could, since the action for our opportunity here is posting to the same record, and the only thing that's different is the message, we could have created a resource formula and used that instead. Pardon the cat. But this is a lot cleaner, because if things change and you need to change the message or maybe add at mentions or something like that, it's a lot easier to do it with separate actions instead of trying to lump everything to one. It's also cleaner because if we have other actions that we need to add to this down in the future, we can simply hit the plus sign, add the action. We don't have to re-architect the flow and say, here's the actions that happen all the time with just the formula with doing the specific stuff. Here's everything else. It'll just become a headache. So we'll save. Opportunity, qualification, needs, after. All actions on opportunity happen after stage is qualification or needs analysis. Save. And let's go do a quick debug here. So we'll go ahead and find an opportunity here. We'll set that it's updated. We'll go through and change the stage to be, where's my stage? There's my stage, to be qualifications, and we'll hit run. And we can go through and say, here's the path, found the right decision, did the outcome, check the chatter post, looks right. We should debug again, and this time let's change it to be needs analysis. Looks good. Let's debug one more time and pick a completely different stage. So, okay, and this didn't fire at all. You notice there's no yellow line, and that is because it got stopped in our start element because of our criteria that we have here. This looks good. The only other test I would do, if you're extra paranoid, is to start where on a record that already has the stage set to qualification, change some other value here and ensure that it doesn't actually go through that decision and fire off. I'm not going to do that today because I can't think of an opportunity off the top of my head with that particular stage. So we'll go ahead and activate this, and let's move on to the next step. So we have the discount applied. So that's is change, and we're doing an email notification. Excuse me, cat. Stop that. I have a cat who is not happy I'm not letting her on my lap. The joys of working from home. So let's do a new flow. Once again, it's record triggered. And we're going to do an auto layout. It's going to be based on opportunity. Again, it's created or updated. And where the conditions are, where the discount is changed. Okay, we have to do the every time it meets because we're evaluating it on is change basis. And we're doing a email notification, so it's going to be after. And at this point, I know that this is set to be run only for the discount, so I don't need a decision element or anything like that. I can go straight to my action. We have a couple options here. One is we could create our own email. We can do a send email here. where we type in everything, including the body. We maybe use a text template for that, and so forth. Perfectly a valid option. If you want something fancier, there is the unofficial sf.com website that has, I believe it's called Send Better Email, which gives you a little bit more customization to this. But we already did an email action with our process builder. So we're just going to reuse the email action. And let's see, I gotta go look. Discount, opportunity discount is the name of the action. So let's go find opportunity discount. And then we put in our record ID. There we go. And that's it. Workflow actions like email alerts have not been told that they're going away, so I'd like to reuse them. I think it's a lot more admin friendly. So if you have an administrator team, maybe you have people who are flow efficient and you have folks who maybe aren't. Well, email alerts are a lot easier to update. So if the recipients change or the body email changes, it's really simple to go through and say, I'm going to go edit the email template, or I'm going to go edit the email alert and change the recipients. You don't have to mess with the actual automation in the flow. Whereas if we did the other option where we built out the actual email in the flow itself, then anytime any of those items change, we would have to edit the automation in the actual flow itself. And anytime you can avoid doing that is good in my book. That way you don't have to worry about did you accidentally add an error, flub a key, whatever the case may be. So our particular item here is done. So we're going to relabel this again. And this is discount applied actions every time the discount field changes, and we'll save. Okay. That takes care of that part of the process builder, which leaves us with closed one. And if we look at this particular one, our criteria is just that the opportunity is closed one. We are updating an account type. We're creating a renewal opportunity. Now, we could have taken the immediate actions that are here and combined them with the flow that we did for qualifications and needs analysis. It would work. However, because we need to create a flow specifically for the scheduled action here, I don't want to do that because that means I will have a flow where my close actions are split between the one that includes qualifications and needs analysis and the one that has my scheduled action. And in that circumstance, I would rather keep all the actions bundled where I can. I know I split up the needs analysis to chatter, post, and update, but I did that for efficiency purposes because we're updating the same record. Here, everything's happening after the fact. In my mind's eye, from an organization standpoint, if I'm going to create a flow that's specifically to a single set of criteria because of the scheduled action, I just want to have everything in there nice and cleanly. It saves on my documentation headache. So back to the flow. We're going to do a new flow. Once again, we're going to do a record trigger flow. We're going to select auto layout. By this point, you should be really good at these steps. We're going to pick opportunity. Record is created or updated. We do have conditions because we're basing this off of the stage being closed one. We only want to do it when it's updated to meet the conditions, and we do want to do it after. Now, in our example with the process builder, we're doing it after 60 days. So that is different than running asynchronously. Running something asynchronously is really useful for doing things where you have a call out to an external system, like using the API. You can run this path where you have run asynchronously, but this is not a schedule. This run asynchronously doesn't mean you're able to say in 60 days do this. It's really intended to differentiate between I'm running something immediately versus I'm running something It's just not immediately, but it's as soon as I possibly can. So if you have records or actions where you're like, I don't need to have the account type to be updated immediately when they close one the opportunity. It's okay if it happens a little bit later. You could put that action as run asynchronously, and that would be one way to kind of like do things like break up limits, or if you don't want the user to get blocked by, say, a validation rule on the account, you can run that asynchronously. The validation will still fire, the update will still fail, but it doesn't interrupt what the user is doing. Those are options. I really don't want to be dealing with asynchronous for our particular example today, so we're going to get rid of the asynchronous path. And instead, we're going to do our scheduled path. So we'll hit add a scheduled path. And this is 60 days post close. Our time source is the date. We could have done it when it's created. But just in case the close date isn't the same thing as the day that it's marked as closed one, we'll do that. And it's going to be 60 days after. And there's our lovely thing. And if we had other actions that are scheduled differently, we would, of course, put different schedules going out there. So, but our example is very straightforward. So let's start with our immediate actions. So we're updating the account type to be customer direct. So there's a couple different ways we could go at this. We could go do a get the opportunity, set the assignment value, with an assignment to the customer type that we want, and then we can do an update records on the account. That's 3 elements. It will work. It's valid. However, we don't need that many elements if we are dealing with something this simple as we're updating one account, and we already know which account it is through the account ID. So we're going to do a straight update records. We're updating the account. Update the account associated with the opportunity. And here we can go through and say what we're updating. We're not updating the record that triggered the flow. We could use IDs. So if we were using the get method, this is the selection you do where you have a resource variable that represents the record. We don't. So we're going to do specify the conditions. So now we have to say, well, what account or what record, what object are we updating? We're updating the account. Which object? And that's going to be based off of the ID of the account being the same as the record or account ID of the opportunity. And then we say, what field do we want? So that's type equals, let's see, I believe it's customer direct. Let's confirm. Customer direct. Done. And we're complete with our run immediately. So that goes into the run immediate section. We're set. Let's take a look at what we need to do from a schedule standpoint. So we're going to create a renewal opportunity, and we're setting the close date, the name, and setting the stage. Okay. So we're going to go plus, and this time we're going to do create records because we're creating a record. I'm one of those people that I cannot type and talk at the same time unless it's the exact same thing I'm typing and talking. All right. So now we have how many records are we going to create? One or multiple? We only need one renewal opportunity. How to set the record fields. So here, if we had a resource that represents everything that we wanted in the record, we would use all values from the record. We don't have a resource. We're going to use separate resources with literal values. It's very similar to what we just did with the update. So we pick our object, and now we have our fields. So let's start with the name of the opportunity is renewal opportunity. Okay, what did we do for a close date? Close date's today. And let's see, I got to remember where the date information is. Oh, I don't know where the date information is off the top of my head. Is it under the flow? Ah, it is. Great. Another way we could do this is we could have created a formula field that has the date. But if we're setting the date to right now, why save us some bother in having to create an extra resource that we don't really need. And then the last one is the stage, which I believe we were setting to prospecting. And we'll click done. And that's it. We've completed our particular flow. Let's go save this. Opportunity. Close one after. Save. And then we could do our wonderful debugging. Oh, let's take a look. We got some warnings. What did this say? Flow contains scheduled pass. Specified the yep. So we need a default workflow user, which I actually have. If the user who triggered the flow to run is no longer active, the workflow user is associated with the flow's actions. Great. Activate. And that's it. We have now successfully taken this process and we have migrated it and all its actions to flow. Granted, it took us multiple flows, but that's okay. It's not a bad thing. So the last thing we want to do is make sure that this is deactivated, and it is. So we're all set. We have now taken our process, migrated to flow. We have our flows activated. We've deactivated our process. Now, this is something you should be doing in a sandbox. Should not be doing this in live production ever. Basically, any automation, you should never be doing it live in production. And then the next step we would do is go through and decide, is there anything else we want to migrate over? And we don't need to. So we're set. I hope you found this useful. If you have questions, let me know in the comments. Like I said, I'll be happy to follow it. You can also go and check out my blog site, which is thewizardnews.com, mainly because I'm the guy that wears the wizard hat at Salesforce events. Other places you can check out are all the other flow videos I have on this channel. Not everything is made with the latest and greatest user interface for flow, but a lot of the concepts are the same, even though the look and feel is a little bit different. And if there's anything you would like to see done or any specific scenarios you would like me to talk about, please leave a comment and let me know. And with that, thank you very much.